Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, what up? Welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm so glad you guys could be with me today, and I'm very, very excited about this episode and the next episode because I have some very special guests with me today. Steve and Jamie VanValin are my guests. So, hello.
Hello.
Glad you guys are here.
So are we.
And I've been looking forward to this. And you guys should know that my pretty wife, Sherry, is in the studio too.
Hey guys, what up?
You know, babe, I've been wanting to get you back in to interview you. You've only been on once, and that's not enough. So, guys, I'm going to have my wife back and interview her and just kind of have a conversation with her soon. I'll try to do that. But anyway, before we get started, I just want to mention that this is an unusual situation. I'm normally in my studio by myself, and tonight there's four of us doing this interview. So I've got my mic set up different, and we're recording a little bit different. So if the audio quality is just a little bit different than you're accustomed to, please forgive us. But I promise that if you hang in here with us, the content is going to be awesome. So thanks for being here, and I'm really excited. And just in the way of disclosure, I'll mention that Steve and Jamie and Sherry and I go way back together. How long have we known you guys?
Maybe 10 years.
10 years or so. And we met in the context of church. And you know how God brings about alliances in the kingdom. And sometimes you can accomplish something in the kingdom, but God brings the right person into your life, the right relationship, and it becomes a strategic kingdom alliance. And then together you're able to accomplish way more than either one of you could have accomplished by yourselves. And without a doubt, that's how I feel about Steve and Jamie. I consider them, if not my very best friends, they're among my very best friends. So I just can't tell you guys how much I love you and appreciate you and the alliance that we've shared in the kingdom. And we've been on quite a journey, haven't we?
That we have.
Yeah, we love you too, Tony.
Starting the church, what God's doing through the church, and then God opening the doors in the prison ministry, and your partnership in the prison ministry, and everything God's doing. It's just remarkable. So let me just start by asking you guys just kind of a generic introduction. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourselves and your life? What do you do? What's your... just so we know a little bit about you. I mean, do you work? Do you have a job? Do you have kids? Just a little bit about your life.
Well, as of right now, I am not working. I have multiple sclerosis and am unable to work. But Jamie and I are a part of a company that we started in 1997 that she is involved with all of the finance of the company. So that's basically what we do.
For income.
For income. And
We have a 12-year-old daughter.
we have a 12-year-old daughter.
Very busy.
How long have you guys been married?
25 years.
25 years. That's quite a long time. And how many kids do you have altogether?
We have 6 children and 7 grandchildren.
Wow.
Ranging in age from 12 to 36.
Okay. And how long have you been believers in Christ?
14 and a half years.
Awesome. Praise be to God. Okay, guys, I know something of your story because, we've been in relationship for a long time. So I know quite a bit about your story. And this is called the Power of Purity podcast. So you guys probably know that the theme of the podcast kind of has to do with the concept of sex. So I wanted to interview you guys and have you as guests on the podcast because I think you have a remarkable story. And I think it's fair to say that you guys have a pretty radical story. You guys have been through a pretty radical metamorphosis in your life from what I might call from black to white, from A to Z, if you picture a grandfather clock, the pendulum swings from one side to the other. It's like at one time you guys were way, way over on a kind of an extreme side with the issue of sex in your lives, and it swung back. Maybe a way to say it is from darkness to light. So if I was going to just ask you in generalities, how would you begin to put words to that? What would you say about the story and the journey that God's had you on, kind of the sexual journey of your lives?
Well, we started out in our life as very oversexed, I guess you would call that. We were
sexual adventurers.
Sexual adventurers, that's a way to say it.
Yeah. We hung out in the swinging crowds, and we involved lots of other people in our sex life. And it was basically, I think both of our identities were wrapped around this sex thing. I often wondered, why am I like this? Other people can't be like this. But I just had this massive sexual addiction.
So you were pretty highly sexualized. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, you were maybe like 11 or 12, something like that.
That's fair.
Yeah. Right.
So would you say, Steve, that you mentioned that you had a sexual addiction. Would you say that you had that your whole life? Did it begin in your 30s, your 20s? How long do you remember struggling with such a highly sexualized self?
Well, for me, there's a specific, what do you call it? Demarcation point.
An event?
In my life story. When I was in 10th grade, I moved from Michigan to Illinois. And I had it was a very difficult move for me, moving to this farm community. I grew up in a wonderful Christian family. My father was a pastor. My brother now is a pastor. My sister married a pastor. My other brother's a Christian psychologist.
Wow.
So I grew up in that environment, and I wasn't a messed up preacher's kid, really, until we moved to Greenville, Illinois, in the middle of my high school. I was very happy in Michigan, and I was immediately very unhappy in Illinois. And I think it began a downward spiral of depression in me that culminated when I was a sophomore in college, and I started cutting myself and acting out. And my oldest brother, who's the psychologist, recognized that I had problems and hooked me up with a psychiatrist that I started seeing. And the psychiatrist decided to put me in a hospital. I think he was trying to figure out if I was crazy or... So I did lots of tests, and he put me with this intern guy, and they just kept me there. And it seemed like I was there for a long time. Anyway, when I got out of the hospital, I think that my family just assumed that I was fine now. I was fixed. And my dad, but I wasn't. I was a mess. And my dad bought me actually a plane ticket to go to Seattle to visit some friends that were in school there. Right after I got out of the hospital, which was at the end of the year, about Christmas time. And where I was going to school, they did not have normal classes in January. So I was off, but my friends had classes at the school they were going to in Seattle. So there in Seattle, while they were in class, I was a musician. I played guitar, and I brought my guitar with me, and I thought it would be fun to go down to Pike Street Market in Seattle and be like a hobo musician, and have people throw quarters in my guitar case. And
so you're just playing the guitar, kind of jamming on the street corners.
Yeah. And so that atmosphere I just loved, and it was so cool. And so I was doing that, and there I met a guy that took a lot of interest in me, and he, it was the very first day, actually. I'd been out there for an hour or so, and then this guy showed up. And
you didn't know this man?
No, I didn't know this guy. So it was there were opportune things going on in my life that Satan, I believe, grabbed onto. Anyway, around Pike Street Market, in that area of Seattle at the time, there were a lot of porn shops, X-rated movie theater, adult bookstores that had peep show booths and things like that. And this guy wanted to show me that stuff. And so I found it pretty intriguing.
So this guy that you just met says, come with me, I'm going to show you some stuff. And he starts taking you around kind of these porn shops and sex shops. And
yes. And I just, I was pretty innocent. I was pretty naive, but I was enthralled by all this stuff. And actually he took me in one of these booths, and then all of a sudden I realized he was wanting to give me oral sex, and he did. And I felt odd about that at first, but then I realized that it was no different than other experiences I'd had. I had some experiences.
So this was the first time you had ever had any kind of sexual or intimate contact with another male.
Yes.
And he wants to do this thing to you, and through this series of events, as this unfolds, this man gives you oral sex. Yes. And I remember you sharing with me that during that experience, it felt really good, of course, and it occurred to you, this is no different with a guy doing this to me than if it was a woman or a girl doing this to me. And you just kind of enjoyed the experience.
Yeah. I did not feel that I was gay or bisexual or anything like that. It's just, this feels good. So then eventually a couple of years after that, I got married, and my wife and I moved to Granite City, Illinois, which is on the east side of St. Louis.
Yes.
And while there, I was in school still, and my wife worked during the day. And it was there that I discovered similar pornography areas on the east side of St. Louis, and I started check those places out. I eventually after I left school, I got involved in a sales job that allowed me to be out of the office and free in the afternoons, and so I would sell.
You could go where you wanted.
I could go where I wanted. So I spent a lot of time for probably the next several years. For a few years, I sold quite a bit on the east side, and would knock off and go hang out at some of these places. And I would there was a pornography, there was a X-rated theater there, and I would go there, and I was always hoping that there would be a couple there, because whenever there was a couple there, it seemed like I always had the opportunity to have sex with a woman, and if not, there were guys that would take care of me. And
right. So you're beginning to visit these places. You're having these experiences with other people. You're meeting other people that are like-minded, and you're kind of getting deeper and deeper, almost into a kind of lifestyle or a preference. It's like it's really kind of shaping your sexual self and your taste and your orientation, your interest,
right,
the trajectory of your life around who you are as a sexual person.
Right. Those experiences that I had with those couples, and there were some that I met that we exchanged numbers, and they would call me, and I would meet them other places too, and caused me to deep down. My wife obviously was not like that, but I developed this fantasy of having a wife that was as overly sexed as these women were that I had experiences with in the theater.
You would have liked it if your wife was willing to share these kind of experiences with you.
Right. If she was that overtly sexual.
Right.
So it was kind of a fantasy of mine.
Steve, if we could go backwards for a moment, I want to just share one observation that I think is significant about your story. And that is, I'm picturing in my mind's eye a row of dominoes. And you know how dominoes work. I've always liked dominoes. I think they're pretty neat. It takes a lot of work to set them up. But then you tip over the very first domino, and of course it hits the second domino, which falls into the third domino, which falls into the fourth domino, so forth and so on. And then and there it goes, you know. And I kind of feel like your experience in Seattle was like the first domino. It's like evil had intentions for your life. And once that domino fell, somehow it planted something in your heart. There were some kind of seeds in that event. And seeds, they take root and they grow. And they'll begin to produce fruit. And for whatever reason, you were at the place in your life where you were very vulnerable to this kind of temptation. It came at the right time. It latched onto you. And that first domino led to something, led to this, and it kind of started this sequence of events that kind of determined the sexual trajectory of your life. And as you guys know, kind of central to our philosophy of ministry at the Outpost Church and even in the Power of Purity ministry, in our prison ministry, we believe very, very much in this concept of story, that what happens in people's lives, events, and the stories of their life have profound significance. For example, and you guys know this because you've heard my story and Sherry's story, but my wife is sitting here with us in this interview this evening, and she was raped when she was 13 years old. So that's a story from her life, right? Well, that individual story held so much power in Sherry's life and soul, it was unbelievable. And it followed her for years and years to come. And she had never dealt with that story in a therapeutic way. She never went to counseling. She never did therapy. And so it held power. It influenced her sense of sexuality, her ability to trust men, and how she felt about sex, and just all these different issues. My observation is that it's unbelievable how much power one story from a person's life can hold. And I feel like your Seattle story is like the first domino that led to something very profound in your life. And so, guys, just in the audience listening to this today, I just might invite you to think about that. I have so many men contact me. They express this thought, I don't understand myself. I'm a Christian. I love God. Why can't I get a hold of this sex thing? Why can't I be healthier? Why does sexual temptation hold so much power over me? And so a big part of the healing journey, we believe, has something to do with understanding your story and dealing with your story. And in fact, I have an incredibly important episode in the Power of Purity conference called Understanding Your Story. And I hope to do it on the podcast because I think it's so important. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing. I love this metaphor. I heard James Dobson give this metaphor that a young person's sexuality is kind of like concrete. When you pour concrete, there's a period of time when the concrete is wet and very impressionable. Have you ever put your hand in wet concrete or your foot and it makes an impression? And then in a very short matter of time, that concrete dries and it becomes hard. And that imprint is, imprinted in there, essentially. And so I think sometimes, like in your example, Steve, I think maybe in a way the Seattle experience was kind of like a kind of imprint that got an impression that pushed into your soul and made an imprint, and then it dried. Something was planted in you that would follow you, that would torment you, something attached to your soul that would follow you for years to come. So anyway, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. I just want us to notice that sometimes it's just one or two strategic events at the right time in our life that have had profound influence upon determining the sexual trajectory of our lives. So that being said, go ahead.
Let me go back. When I got out of the hospital, when I went into the hospital, when I was at the peak of my depression, I felt so sensitive to everything. I felt like I didn't even have skin on. I was freaked out about the war in the Falkland Islands, where Great Britain was bombing Argentine ships and stuff, and all these people were dying, and I was like wanting to kill myself over it. I was just so sensitive. Anyway, when I got out of the hospital, I decided that I'm just not going to feel anymore. I'm going to cure myself by not feeling. And so you talk about separation of heart sometimes. So I just took my heart, put it over there, and I said, I'm just not going to live with it anymore. I'm going to do what everybody expects me to do, my Christian family, but deep down, I'm just going to live my own life the way I want to live it. It was right at that time, when I got out of the hospital, I made those strategic life decisions, and I went straight to Seattle. So I believe that the enemy saw me as just a really ripe target, and he shot his arrows right at me.
Right. It makes sense, Steve. There was a kind of vulnerability about your life and your soul at this point. You're a young person. You're really fighting serious depression. You've been cutting yourself. You've been in the hospital. This depression has been so bad. You decide you're going to deal with it by detaching from your heart, kind of really numbing yourself. And in the midst of this, you go to Seattle and you have this experience. It becomes the first domino that begins this journey of your life. And it just feels like the way we would connect the dots is that when you're feeling dead and depressed and numb, probably a person is looking for something to make them feel good. And what feels better than an orgasm, So is that how you connect the dots? You think that somehow you were set up to enter into this hypersexuality, to find happiness, to find something that was giving you meaning, something that you could feel that was pleasurable, in contrast to all the kind of pain and sadness that you had been feeling.
Yes. Yeah. I think exactly right. So that vulnerability, I was so vulnerable at that time and just was bowled over by this experience in Seattle.
Right.
That changed the trajectory of my life.
And by the way, I might just mention, again, I'm just observing, but I think that everybody's story is a little bit different, right? The nuances. But I think kind of like the main point of your story can apply to so many men's lives. That the way that we end up using sex becomes very, very unhealthy. In the verbiage of the 12 steps, there's this term, I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but what we do is we trade our FB for our FG, our feel bad for a feel good. And so it's why the alcoholic drinks, right? I feel bad, my life sucks, my relationships are bad, I'm depressed, I don't have enough money, I feel bad, life is hard, life makes me feel bad, so I want to seek out something that's going to make me feel good. For the alcoholic, alcohol makes me feel good. For the drug addict, drugs make me feel good. For the sex addict, sex makes me feel good. And I think this is what a lot of men do. We end up turning to begin to use our sexuality and our orgasm in what turns out to be a very unhealthy way, because we're using it in the desperate attempt to escape, to numb ourselves, to make ourselves feel good. And in so doing, we're beginning to use our sexuality in what becomes very unhealthy ways. So with that being said, Jamie, can I turn to you for a moment? So we have a little sense of Steve's background, how the development or the trajectory of his sexual self unfolded, and it moved him toward this sexual brokenness. So how would you put words to that in your own story? What happened in your young life that maybe a way to say it, what was your first domino, the first, second, third domino? What happened that began to affect the trajectory of your sexual self and the woman that you would become?
I would say that in my family of origin, my mother was a very cold woman, seemingly not very affectionate, not ever really willing to say that she loved us, or I feel like she was doing all she could to just survive herself, but in a little girl's heart, leaves one needing to be loved, so some sign that I was loved. And so, of course, in my story, I turned to boys in the neighborhood, and they were always interested in
giving you attention.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And it's kind of reminds me of the old song. Who sang the song? Looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love in too many faces. So the young girls, what do they want? They want acceptance, they want attention, they want affection, they want to be affirmed, they want to be loved. And what do the boys want? The boys want to get in the girls' pants, And so I think that part of your story is so common. Would you say it's common for you, babe? I mean, it's very much what happened to you, right?
Yeah. I think another part of your story, though, your mom is not a cold woman, but she was also really struggling in her marriage, and she had 3 little kids, and then she had a brand new little baby. And your dad moved out, and
correct.
You were exposed to an awful lot of pornography.
I was, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I was about 7, between the ages of 7 and 10, my mom and dad were in the process of splitting up and getting back together. So my dad was always kind of moving in and out of our house. And at one point, I think I was probably about 9, my dad had moved out and had moved into an apartment with a bunch of guys, a big bachelor pad. And yet we still went to his house on weekends to visit with our dad. And all over the house there was porn. All these magazines everywhere, books, all everywhere. On the bathroom sink, in the basket next to the toilet, on the coffee table in the living room. I mean, it was everywhere.
No effort to try to hide it from the kids at all.
No, none at all. And so my dad was a policeman, and he was gone often. So he worked swing shifts. So even on weekends, I had an older sister, so she would stay and babysit, and my dad would go to work. And so I found it fascinating. So I started reading and looking at all this pornography, all these magazines, and really came to, frankly, understand why my dad didn't like my mom, because she wasn't anything like any of those women in those magazines, and she certainly, in my opinion, at 9 years old, didn't do any of those things that the women in those stories did. So
right.
I really came to blame my mother for the reason that my dad was leaving the house.
Because if only your mother would have been more like the women in the pornography, maybe your dad wouldn't have left.
Well, obviously that's what he liked. He had it all over his house. So yeah, if my mom would have been more like that, he wouldn't have left.
Wow. That's very powerful, Jamie. I've heard you talk about this before, but this is like a different nuance of the story. I think it's incredibly powerful. So it feels like what's being embedded in this little girl who has kind of an emptiness, this kind of relational loneliness, this neediness. First, it's being modeled to you by your father and these other men. Obviously, this is what men like. This is what men want. This is the kind of woman that men are attracted to, that men talk about, that men want to look at, that men want to be with.
That's correct.
And so if you're going to grow up and be a woman that men like, then maybe you should be like these women.
Yes.
That's the seeds, the first dominoes of your sexual journey.
That's correct. Yes. I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be that kind of a woman, I was going to be the kind of woman who was not like my mother, not cold, unfeeling, more like the women that you would see in those magazines, sexy, pretty, those kind of things.
So how would you say that began to affect you? This is 9, 10, 11 years old. You mentioned beginning to have experiences with boys in the neighborhood.
And girls.
And girls.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that this led to promiscuity during your adolescence, your teenage years?
Yes. By the time I was 15 years old, there had been many sexual experiences, even though I had not lost my virginity yet. But at 15, I was in my first year of high school, and I met a senior boy and decided now's the time. And so from then on, basically, anyone who asked, for the most part, I was game.
So you at this point were just a very sexualized young lady.
Yes, that's correct.
And we understand now, the work that you've done, that underneath that, you were really searching for something and trying to find it in men through sex.
Yes, I feel like I was very sad and very lonely. I felt very depressed, as Steve said he was. I wanted love. I wanted someone to love me. And you think that, if you have sex with this boy or this boy or this boy, one of them is going to fall for you, want to be yours,
right.
Love you.
Well, it's all kind of sad. It makes me feel sad.
I feel sad for her too.
It's like this little girl almost like didn't have a chance, There's no adult really guiding you or speaking wisdom into your life or spirituality. And so you're kind of just thrown out there trying to figure it out on your own, and through the example of your parents, and then finding the pornography and your experiences with boys, this is the trajectory of your life. You're trying to find something through your sexuality.
Yes, and even though you have relations with all of these boys, it really leaves you feeling more empty after, when they don't call or they don't want to be your girlfriend or your boyfriend. They don't want to be your boyfriend. They want to just have sex with you, and they want to go away. They don't want to, hang around. So
right.
Feel worse and worse and worse. After every experience, you kind of just feel worse and worse and worse, like by that point, I was literally, just basically having sex with and making myself feel worse every single time. Right.
Which is kind of the stereotypical example that we think of, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but hoping you get a different result. But of course, as a young kid, 14, 15, 16, 17, you're trying to figure life out. And the frame of reference you have at this point, you don't know any better. Mm-hmm. So you're just doing what you know to do, living your life and hoping for the best. Hey guys, I hate to do this, but I see from our clock that our episode is coming to a close. So I'm going to have to wrap this episode up. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know that in this episode, we're hearing about Steve and Jamie's story, and we're hearing about kind of the sad part, the bad part of the story, the dark part of the story. But stay with us. Come back next week. Check out the next episode, because I promise you it's an incredible story. It's a story of God's power to change the human heart, of God's ability to rescue very deeply broken people and it's a story of redemption. So you guys are going to want to hear this. And Steve and Jamie are living proof that God can heal people who have been deeply and profoundly broken in their sexuality. So if you're listening to this episode and you've struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled with sex, you're going to be encouraged by this story because it's a story of redemption. So come back in our next episode. Steve and Jamie, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
My dove, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And guys, I'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.